Good morning. Now we move to our last author in this course, to Emile Durkheim. There are really two Durkheims. We have seen certainly two Marxes and two Webers. There are also two faces of Emile Durkheim. To put it bluntly, the young Durkheim has been a functionalist and a positivist. And then late in his life, he has his epistemological turn. He became a cultural analyst. Well, it's not quite true because, each author is more complex, and there were already elements of his culturalism in the early work. But there was certainly a dramatic change in the way how Durkheim conceived what the job of social science is later in his life, in his book, The Elementary Forms of Religious Life. I think it had a lot to do also with his personal life, and we will talk about this. He was brought up in a rabbinical family and was supposed to become a rabbi. And then he revolted against the parental household, much like Nietzsche did, turned probably into an atheist, but certainly not an active believer in Judaism. And later in his life, he became again interested in religion, and not only philosophically, but also existentially interested in religion. In the course, we have only 4 lectures on Durkheim, so I leave Durkheim, the culturalist, out, and we will doing work only on his earlier work. The Division of Labor, the wonderful book Suicide, and the somewhat difficult book, The Rules of Sociological Method. And I just leave the elementary form of religious life. I don't have time to fit this into. Durkheim had an extraordinary impact on American social science. Initially, it was particularly the younger Durkheim, the functionalist Durkheim, who had such an extraordinary impact. Unlike Weber or Marx, whose impact was broad and affected history and economics and political science, Durkheim's impact was much more focused on sociology. So in this course, the only author who, properly speaking, is a sociologist is Emile Durkheim. All the others you discussed were not really identified themselves as sociologists. Later in his life, Weber did, but not on the whole. Emile Durkheim identified himself and his project as a sociology. It, of course, has lot to do that these disciplinary boundaries between economics, political science, and sociology became much more sharply drawn by the end of 19th and early 20th century. And sociology as an academic discipline was really established by the late 19th century. So this is Emile Durkheim, born in 1858 and died in 1917. Just very briefly about his life. He was born in a small town, Epinal, in France. As I said, his father was a rabbi, and he was expected to become a rabbi himself. In 1979, he was admitted to the École Normale Supérieure, which is one of these very elite schools, MIT version in France. And by the time he went to university, École Normale Supérieure, his university, he lost his religious beliefs. He was for some time a professor at the University of Bordeaux. Then he became politically active in the 1940s, especially in the so-called Dreyfus Affair, and I will just briefly mention what that was. Then 1902, he became professor at the University of Paris, which is not quite as distinguished as École Normale Supérieure. His son was killed in the war, and shortly after this he died in Paris. So this is Alfred Dreyfus. This is a very important event in French and in many ways in European history. What was the Dreyfus Affair? You probably all know. In 1894, Dreyfus, who was Jewish, was falsely accused to be a German spy, and it was imprisoned. That was obviously an anti-Semitic trial, and this mobilized the French intellectuals, and not only French intellectuals, but French intellectuals in particular. Emile Zola, whom some of you may have read, the leading French writer of this epoch, wrote an important article which appeared in the leading French daily newspaper. J'accuse, I accuse the French judiciary of being anti-Semitic. Well, Durkheim joined other prominent French intellectuals to protest the trial. It took them a long time, but eventually they were successful. Dreyfus was eventually exonerated of all charges and made the Knight of the Legion of Honor. So it was a happy ending of French anti-Semitism for a while. Then it came back with vengeance. During the occupation, Nazi occupation, French are not as innocent about anti-Semitism as you may want to believe it. Many were collaborating with the Nazis. Well, about the work, in 1993 he wrote a dissertation, which probably is still his most influential book, The Division of Labor in Society, and today's lecture will be focused on this. 1995, it was followed by The Rules of Sociological Method, which is his most positivistic statement. The Division of Labor is his most functionalist work. And then in 1997, he wrote Suicide. Suicide is a very important book because it's really the first piece of rigorous empirical social science, which takes a very unusual, very rare phenomena like suicide and crunches numbers extremely carefully to test whether he can identify social determinants of such a rare phenomenon. Fortunately, even in countries where many people commit suicide, it's still a rare phenomenon. But he managed to come up with a very provocative theory, but he demonstrated with very careful empirical analysis. We will be looking at two parts of the division of labor. Today we will be looking at the major arguments of division of labor, and then also we will look at Thursday on his theory of anomy, which is a central piece of the book Division of Labor, but a kind of, by the way, analysis. And as I said, in 1915, he wrote this book, The Elementary Forms of Religious Life, which is a major break in his work and shows his renewed interest in the spiritual and the metaphysical. Okay, just very briefly, what is in the books? As I said, the division of labor was his PhD dissertation. But unlike many scholars whose only good book is their dissertation, Durkheim followed it up with a number of good other books. Many professors are actually one-book people, or at least they should have been, because their only good book was the dissertation, and what they published later only published because publish or perish, right, to get tenure. That's why they probably published too many books. Anyway, he was inspired by Montesquieu. Well, Durkheim is very French, and his roots are deeply in Montesquieu, and to some extent in Rousseau. He admired Rousseau as well. But Montesquieu is really the major inspiration behind him. And, well, what he does, he uses law as a measure of social development, much like Montesquieu did, sort of, and he explains by using the law, the legal system, how the division of labor evolved, what were the stages of the development of division of labor. Well, just a very brief contrast, right? Marx was interested in economic conflict, right, in struggle around scarce economic resources. Weber was interested in struggle for power, so was Nietzsche. Durkheim was interested in social solidarity. Marx and Weber are conflict theorists. They try to explain what breaks up society. Durkheim is a theorist which tries to understand what holds society together, what brings us together, why society is not falling apart. Right. Well, in the book, he makes a crucial distinction between two types of solidarity, mechanical and organic solidarity. And I will speak about this at great lengths. This is another attempt to develop a typology of evolution of societies. You are already familiar with Marx's modes of production, right? The evolution from slavery to feudalism to capitalism. You are familiar with Max Weber, traditional authority and legal rational authority. Now, Durkheim's alternative is mechanical and organic solidarity, right? What Weber called traditional authority is kind of mechanical solidarity for Durkheim, or what Marx called pre-capitalist formations is mechanical solidarity. Organic solidarity describes legal rational authority or modernity or capitalism. He also identified the pathological forms of division of labor, and this is what he called anomie. And his idea of anomie is a kind of similar or analogous distinction what was alienation in Marx and what was disenchantment in Weber. Though there are very important differences as well, and I will be talking about this Thursday. Now on suicide, as I said, this is one of the first very rigorous empirical studies of a social phenomenon, a phenomenon we think is not quite social. We think it is really an individual decision whether you take your life or not. But Durkheim actually was capable to show that even in this very private action, when you take your life, there are social determinants who is committing suicide or not. And he is making a distinction between different types of suicide, anomic, altruistic, egoistic, and fatalistic ones. And I will be talking about this after you return from Thanksgiving's break. Now about the methodology. He was a methodological collectivist, much like Montesquieu or Rousseau, and very much unlike Hobbes, Locke, or Mill. Marx being kind of halfway between methodological individualism and collectivism. As a theorist of revolutionary consciousness, he was a methodological collectivist. We will see Durkheim's notion of collective conscience is not all that different from Marx's idea of class consciousness, which is not the sum total, right, of the individual consciousness of workers. But Marx, in his theory of exploitation, as you have read his text, reads almost like Adam Smith or John Stuart Mill, right? It's self-interested rational individuals from which he explains the nature of exploitation. Well, it's much more difficult to figure out how Weber fits into these categories. I think he's also vacillating between collectivism and individualism. Later in his life is becoming more of a methodological individualism. But Durkheim, the consistency in Durkheim is that from day one, he's a methodological collectivist and remains a methodological collectivist. But at the same time, he believed in the existence of social facts. And the social facts, on the other hand, can be observed with rigorous empirical methodology. And this is what makes him, in a way, a positivist. So this is just a brief introduction to who the author is. And now let me move to the division of labor. Right. Well, my computer getting slower as the semester is progressing, so it's probably time for the semester to end because my laptop, though it is new, it still will become unbearably slow by the end of the semester. Okay, so this is Emile Durkheim and the division of labor in society. So how does Durkheim proceed in the work? And today's presentation will focus on the question why Durkheim begins the analysis by taking the law as the point of departure. Then we will proceed how he makes the distinction between organic and mechanical solidarity. So the question actually is for a methodological collectivist that you need to find some collective expression in order to study society, not individuals. And much like Montesquieu, he believes that the law is such a collective phenomenon, a law which can be studied and established without studying individual views or individual opinions, right? It's parts of what Durkheim's terminology is the collective conscience, which is above individual consciousnesses. Okay, so that's what are the most important issues in the work as far as we discuss it today. Well, he is interested in solidarity. As I pointed out, his real question is what holds society together. We are so different, society should fall apart. Right? He's writing in the late 19th, early 20th century. This is the time of industrialization, of urbanization. people are dislodged from their traditional communities, from the traditional villages, pushed away from peasant agriculture and move into urban industrial employment. And the question is, will society break down? Will social order break down if the traditional order does not keep us together? And this is what he tries to figure out. What in a modern urban and industrial society can keep us together? And he tries to find solidarity. And what creates this solidarity is collective consciousness. And the fundamental idea in Durkheim about collective consciousness, as I said, it is analogous to the notion of the general will in Rousseau, or the notion of class consciousness in Marx. So therefore it is not the sum total of individual consciousnesses, but something of shared norms, beliefs, and values which exist prior an individual is being born, prior society actually existed, which is passed on from one generation to the other, right? And therefore he tries to show, right, these collective consciousnesses which persist over time. And of course the most obvious, most rigorous way to go about is to look at law, because that's exactly what the law is, right? The law is changing over time, but usually the change is very, very slow and reaches over several generations. For somebody who is a French social scientist, you know, and one unique we already talked about this. The French are very methodological collectivists. The Anglo-Saxons tend to be methodological individualists. And the French, unlike the German, are very scientific. They are very much scientists. The word scientific in German does not exist. The Germans say, ich bin ein Wissenschaftler. Wissenschaft means, Wissen is knowledge. Science in German is constituted by all sorts of knowledge, right? It's a much broader notion, right? In French or in English, with science we really mean rigorous science of the natural science types. Well, that's Durkheim did not go as far as saying it is natural science, but certainly he was very scientific in insistence of rigorous analysis of objective data, right? That's what, while the Germans, you know, Wissenschaftler, all those who study ideas are Wissenschaftlers. It's a much, much, much broader notion. Natural scientists are also Wissenschaftlers, but people who study humanities and history of ideas are also Wissenschaftlers. People who are an expert on Hobbes and spend their life writing on Hobbes is a Wissenschaftler, right, in German. We can hardly say somebody who does, right, history of ideas to be a scientist, right? It's, we are iffy. We call it, you know, humanities. We talk about social sciences with a lot of anxiety. And real scientists ask us, social science, what do you mean? What is science about what you are doing? Well, those of you who take economics, they make sure it looks like science because you have all the equations on the blackboard. So therefore, you know, a scientist can relax. But if you are listening to my lectures and not a single equation on the blackboard, you probably have doubt that this is really social science. Anyway, he was scientific in sense of being very rigorous in his analysis. Sort of what is collective consciousness? I give here a citation for you, right? It is a totality of beliefs and sentiments which are common to the average member of society, right? But which has a life of its own, right? That's what he calls collective consciousness. So this is different from the consciousnesses of the individuals, though, you know, he's a scientist, right? He's scientific. It has to be realized in individuals. So therefore, I mean, Durkheim would not necessarily be opposed to carry out even survey research and ask individuals about their customs or values and sort of aggregate this up and try to find those patterns, especially over time and across nations. That's not really what he did. But I think he would be open for this kind of research, which of course made him so influential in early American sociology in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, because American sociology has been very positivist and very empirical. Well, but the most obvious example of collective conscience is the law, probably also the language. Well, there are differences in law in pre-modern and modern societies. Now we are getting into his building the argument up to make the distinction between organic and mechanical and organic solidarity. Let me just go through of this. Oops, went too far. Okay. The argument is that in pre-modern societies, the law which existed is primarily a repressive or penal law. Well, there is the purpose of punishment is to punish evil behavior, and we tend to agree what is evil behavior is. And punishments, therefore, also tends to be harsh to prevent further aggressive behavior by individuals. So this is the legal system of pre-modern societies. Well, I will give you a couple of citations. And I won't read them. I will put them on the internet, and you can read it at your leisure. It kind of elaborates on the points what I made. But in modern society, the legal system is very different. The legal system is based on contract. The essence of modern legal system is contract. That's not that we do not have a penal code, right? The penal code survives, but what is novel is contractual law, which is restitutive, which is not about punishing evil, but simply restitute the damage somebody by breaking a contract caused to the other contracting partner, right? And he said, well, this is a new type of law which emerges with modernity. Marx would say it is a new legal system which emerges with capitalism. And Weber will say this is the essence of legal rational authority. Why does he study law? I don't want to elaborate on this too long. That's obvious that the legal system is the single best measure of what he tries to get at collective conscience. which can be studied the most objectively, right? There are law books and legal practices and minutes of recordings, how the courts operated and how law was made and implemented, which can be studied with great level of rigor. For instance, it's very easy to study whether indeed contractual law is a new form of law. You can go back to legal history and to establish exactly when contractual law emerged. This was actually also very much on the mind of the young Weber when he was also looking at basically the emergence of contractual law in late medieval Italy in his PhD for the law degree. I think I already made this point. What is interesting that Durkheim and Weber sort of ignored each other. I don't think they ever cited each other. I don't recall ever seeing a citation to one another. Though they were working on the same area, of course they both did speak both of the languages, and they were, of course, aware that the other giant exists. They were probably in many ways too close, too much in competition with each other to cite each other. I mentioned already that Durkheim did review Mariana Weber's book, but never any of Weber's book. Though Mariana was writing about marital law, marriage law, which was a marginal interest to Durkheim, and Weber was writing on religion, which was so central for Durkheim's interests, and nevertheless they kind of ignored each other. Now, about the two types of solidarity. Mechanical solidarity, it's hard to remember the distinction. One would think organic solidarity must be old, right, and mechanical must be modern, the machines. Now the opposite is true. I kept making these mistakes for the first 2 or 3 years when I was reading Durkheim some 45 years ago. Mechanical solidarity is which describes pre-modern societies. And this is a solidarity which, based on the similarities of the parts. This is why you can have a penal law, because a penal law does not make a distinction between contractual partners. It assumes the sameness of the group as such. Mechanical solidarity, is, as I said, is primarily based that we see ourselves similar in the group. Organic solidarity, so will Durkheim argue, is one which is based on differences in society. A higher level of division of labor in society produces organic solidarity. Organic, he means, it is a kind of biological analogy. A modern society is like the human body, right? There are functional differences between the human organs. That's why it is organic solidarity, right? The heart performs a different function than the lung, but the lung could not live without the heart, right? This is why this is organic solidarity. Society operates more like an organism. In earlier times, society was more operating like a machine, where you actually, a part is taken out mechanically. It doesn't matter all that much, right? It is a simple machine, I mean. So that's the fundamental distinction. By the way, also for Durkheim, and this is also in the text, what you are reading, this distinction between mechanical and organic solidarity is developed in order to describe societies as such. But much like Weber's notion of traditional authority and legal rational authority, he is also using this to understand social solidarities in contemporary life. So mechanical solidarity does exist in contemporary society as well. And he makes, this reference to finding a marital partner whom we want to date with and whom we consider to marry. Occasionally, we try to find somebody who is more similar than we are, and people will say, well, you look like, if you are heterosexual, like brothers and sisters, or if you are gay, then you look like brothers or you look like sisters, right? You look same, you look similar. And that can be, right, a consideration for a lasting partnership. I'm trying to find somebody who likes the same stuff what I like, who is like me, right? But it can be the opposite as well, right? You may be looking for a person, you may follow the logic of organic solidarity, right? You may be looking for a person who will complement you, right? I'm bad in keeping the books, and therefore what I'm trying to look forward is somebody who will balance the checkbook, right? So occasionally looking for a partner, we are looking for somebody who will complement us. Now that describes, right, modern society with a higher level of division of labor. Division of labor, he says, can bring us together, much like the bodily organism, that we are performing different functions in society. We complement each other. We need each other on the basis of our differences rather than our similarities. And in fact, the contractual law expresses the spirit of organic solidarity as such. Well, Durkheim will show us that there is, in fact, a lot of trouble in the transition from mechanical to organic solidarity. And this is what he will call anomie. In the transition from mechanical to organic solidarity, moving from a traditional society to a modern society, our value system breaks down. We find ourselves in the situation of anomie, but this is a topic I will be talking about Thursday. Thank you very much.